Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the ninth conversation devoted to the selected artist of the 61st edition of the Faenza Prize. Today we have the pleasure of having Irene Biolchini leading the conversation. Irene is our guest curator at Make Faenza, and I don't want to waste time, and I leave her the word. So Irene, it's to you.
Thank you a lot for your introduction. Thanks also for having asked me to do this series of talks. Today is my last one, so I am sorry that is almost over for me, but it was a beautiful journey. I thank all the people that attended to this talk, and again, I will not use the time of our spectators, but I would rather move immediately to the first artist invited in this series of talk. Today, conventionally, we will follow an alphabetical order. So we will start with Monika, and we leave the stage to her to introduce us her research and her work, and then we will arrive in surprise.
Okay, here I am. Nice cat. Hi all, thank you for the opportunity to present you my work. And I would like to be concise. First of all, I will tell you something about my last site-specific installation intitulated Water Walk With Me. And the title is surely a reference to one of my favorite movie of David Lynch, Fire Walk With Me, where the fire is kind of symbol of evil. So in my version of title, on the contrary, the subject change in water, and for me is the symbol of good, purity and generosity of nature. Then the title, it's like a wish or like request, water walk with me, please. My installation is a sort of labyrinthic construction made of many containers. Some of those are similar to industrial items, chemical containers, some are like ancient amphora or bottles. Some are almost organic or similar to the tribal architecture from the desert or, I don't know, village of Star Wars. All handmade with white clay. I used also some metallic tripod or stool I found somewhere. It's recycling stuff. All this structure represent curvy and complicated fluxes of water in the earth, in its polluted atmosphere, and also in human body, in the ocean, and in every living structure. It can be as well a warning. All those elements are connected one with another unavoidably. And the life can't exist without clean water, without this supreme good. And I think about it since I'm little girl, thanks to my father, geophysician, who every time scared me and asked me to stay attentive to the water and to stay tuned about pollution, because we will have a problem with the water. And for me, it's like became symbol of good, of survival. And there are another installation. I still see Water Walk With Me. Then we have all these containers. It is quite big installation, like 3 meters for 3 meters, and it can change I will develop it, I think, in time. And this we have celebrative objects accumulation. I made them using the technique of sleep casting, assembling the organic form like a human skull or other facsimile anatomic human parts. Also, real animal skull bones I consider extremely beautiful, and I always want to preserve it. The outcome is a facsimile Baroque object full of detail, like totem, and it's still homage to the beauty and perfection of the life form. As in case of work I presented before. It's important to celebrate the wealth and the generosity of nature, to preserve it. For example, in a case of celebrative object cow we will see soon, I wanted to give the symbolic, there is it, symbolic second life to the beautiful big skull of cow I found in the meadow nearby my house. And it's also my homage to the cow, because we all are animals, and we forgot very often how important it's to feel it. We have some imagine of celebrated object from exhibition in gorgeous Stupinigi Castle in Torino. Installation there are quite mimetic with many architectonic details in those enormous rooms. Paradoxically, the castle is dedicated to hunting, and I tried to make them be the part of the furniture, and at the same time to be like strange, alive creature we can see in this place. And there are some obviously organic form here. We have like 3 human skull bones. Not real, obviously. I did it sleep casting with white clay. And the installation from this is from Mons, I think, Belgium, and we have here also inspiration by mysterious life of insect metamorphosis, and also reminiscence of human organs. And I use also always the human organ like kind of icon, and those important details of our physiognomy are like the way for me to remember how important it is to take care about it, take care about nature. And then after we will have another example. There is it, passenger. Installation from Jeonji in South Korea during manifestation in the Earth time. I realized that anthropomorphic figure of baby with bust, with anti-gas mask incorporated in its face. It was a few years ago, and we have all this bottle for gas, and it was not very good, auspicious. I often use anthropomorphism to represent uncertain life of contemporary society, which often ignored the fact that we belong to the animal kingdom and we change in time. Like, for example, I used the imagine of animal. Also here, there is an opera from the last Biennale of ceramic in Faenza. And I think animals are the symbol of innocence. And I realized imagine of this animal still also with white clay, oil painted, handmade. The other example can be also Dogmaster, the installation from Bornholm in Denmark, where I realized an imaginative group of still anthropomorphic puppies, indolent, quite lazy, looking toward the neon lamp, maybe waiting for something from heaven or something like that, like a lot of people do, waiting for something, maybe like I do. Sometimes an animal is a sweeting subject to illustrate, as I said, the idea of victim. Because, as I said, they are a victim of humanity, like all wild nature, which surrounds our often uncivilized civilization. I have many work dedicated to animals, to mutation, and and there is worship factor. The installation from Museum Zauli in Faenza, and it represents gold ancient god. We can put in a terrarium or glass cage and feed them without fear and without religion, and also it's illustrate like a lack of respect of tradition. Yes, there is like a possibility to us to organize a private religion for everyone. And well, that's all.
Yes.
Thank
No,
you.
thank you a lot, Monika, for this introduction, for the presentation of your work. And what I think is really interesting, there is a strange return, and maybe if you, thank you. What I found very interestingly is the journey that you presented to us, starting from very recent artworks, actually, 2020, arriving till some works or 4 or 5 years ago. What I found really interesting in your presentation is precisely what you were saying, so that in your work is the human part that makes the work uncanny. The animal part is very recognizable, put us quite safe in a safe area, but then when the human anthropomorphism enter, we realize that there's something uncanny going on, something disturbing going on. And what is interesting is that's precisely the human organs or the human body that creates this clash. And another important thing that I think is quite relevant, and it emerged also last week, is the kind of awareness that new artists, contemporary artists, do have in relation to our habitat, to the water, as you were saying, to the earth, because ultimately what we do is to work with ceramics. We do work with earth, and so we do have to take care of earth. And so your witnessing was extremely important. Another aspect, just to introduce who is coming after you, is the contrast between modernism and contemporary times, in the sense that some of your themes are very modern in the classical idea of modernism. I'm thinking like about Kafka and the Metamorphosis and all the literature that came after, and the way in which you interpret this idea of solitude that was typical of modernism, but in a new, contemporary, uncanny way. Sometimes also predicting what is happening, like in the case of the mask, that in that case was a gas mask and not an oxygen mask, but still was something uncanny and predictive somehow. So thank you a lot for this start. And after this uncanny, scary introduction, I would like to pass the word to the next artist presenting his work today. So Peter, if you want, the stage is yours and we will hear from you.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate all the hard work the museum has done, and you and Claudia and Stefania. So first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you for being with us.
So much of my work, plays with the idea of labor and the act of constructing, and explores different aspects of architecture as a way of exploring that. And if you see in the next slide where you can see kind of work in progress, my work has, is increasingly made from tiny little bits of porcelain that are assembled and stuck together. And I think it's important that there has this sort of sense of labor or time involved in the accumulation of that object or the building of that object. And this next image that looks at this wooden trestle bridge, I think images like this really remind me of this Herculean sort of active building. And I love this image and think about, what it took to build this bridge. And it seems to sort of embody that sense of time and that sense of labor. And that's something I try to exploit or capitalize on in my work. And this next image of the architect Felix Candela was so pivotal for me. Like when I saw this image, I was just so moved. I mean, I think the work under construction, I honestly found maybe more beautiful than the finished building. But they're both beautiful. But I think this image actually sent me in a new direction from my work previously, which was larger scale. And I wanted to capture the sort of essence of what I found so stimulating in this image. And so the works that follow this image were kind of me beginning to play with this. I started to build these forms and lay this heavy layer of glaze. In Felix Candela's work, that shell structure architecture, the concrete is laid on top of the form and it becomes the building in the end. But in my work, the glaze becomes this sort of shell that the weight of it sort of starts to collapse the form, and you can see where this just starts to snap as it sags. And I think that sort of beginning of this sort of brokenness is the important aspect of this work. And in the next few slides, I just show some earlier examples of playing with form and thinking about the weight of the glaze and just learning how the color might sit. I want this sort of alien, sort of foreign color. I didn't want it to reinforce the idea of landscape or architecture, but to break from that tradition. And then I started thinking about this act of this slumping, or what's the right word for it? This subtle movement as something begins to collapse. And I just think that's a beautiful, point in time where there's this sort of a humanness that begins to come when something begins to slump, or that's arguable, but I think in my perspective that starts to be a little bit beautiful. And so in the next few slides, I start to exploit that idea of collapse as this seems a little more like the way that I've experienced life than this really proud, perfectly geometric rendition. And in the next slide, you know, I've created, this is around 2016, and I recreated a number of these monuments, these sort of obelisks, or it could be the Washington Monument, or and sort of collapsing them into a pile. You know, it felt right for what I felt I was experiencing here in the United States. And so using that sort of idea of collapse as a way to begin to think through my experience, you know. And another body of work I wanted to show is these cathedrals I worked on for a show at Fair and Contemporary. And so I you know, these have like 2 or 3, maybe 4,000 little pieces of porcelain put together to assemble them. And I think they start out, you know, I saw these blueprints in the next slide that are the historic blueprints of many of the cathedrals. And you know, of course, I just love this image and the graphic quality. I grew up working construction for with my father. And so, you know, some of this sort of, I remember his blueprints as a kid. And so I adapted these. In the next slide, you can see that I work with, sometimes I work with 3D modeling software where I took those blueprints and I made my own, and then I fabricated or I built, you know, some sort of version, a sort of abstracted version of these cathedrals. And, you know, then set about deconstructing them, if you will. And so you'll see in the next few images where, you know, this porcelain structure is then it's distorted. So I'm kind of removing the by propping it up or changing the way gravity affects it. You know, because of the pyroplastic nature of porcelain, it starts to warp and it starts to bend. And so really using that quality of the material. And so, you know, you have this one, and this show, you know, I'm taking T.S. Eliot poem titles and I'm using them as sort of metaphorically, I guess, to think about that sense of sorrow. And sort of, I think T.S. Eliot's sort of relationship with Christianity was also complex, right? So taking the church and sort of thinking about it as a vehicle. So these next few slides are from that exhibition where this is sort of form becomes capsized, and the next one has all of the glaze sort of coming through and rising up out of it, I guess. So that would have been fired upside down, right? And sort of bent and stretched. And this black one that comes next is, or this with the black glaze, you know, is sort of laying on its side. And to me, these are still, you know, I think this sort of place of, you know, they're beautiful in, they're not meant to become ugly, you know, they're meant to become beautiful in that sort of bent nature of it. And I think it's necessary in my mind that they seem so labored over that there's like oh my God, why would you, you know, slump that thing? It looked so nice before in a traditional sense. And so this last one from this exhibition, the red one, you know, you can see the structure doesn't need to collapse. It could be kept in its normal, you know, it works. It's engineered to stand up, but it's also engineered to collapse if I ruin that. And so there's a few installation shots of this exhibition, and just to give a sense of scale, because they're 30 inches, and again, that's something larger in centimeters, and they're meant to sort of have this certain sort of mass and the sort of scale. So there's one more installation shot here. Now, and this exhibition was sort of exhibited with some blueprints, right? So, or faked blueprints, whatever. I made these drawings for the wall that, you know, were part process, part art, to really think about that as a drawn thing. I think the precision of that comes from a digital rendering, and then the distortion that happens when it's made by hand is always something that I'm interested in. And so the next image, you know, before I lived here in Ohio, where I teach at Kent State University, I was living in Oregon, and I would drive by some of these barns that were collapsed into these 100-year-old barns, which, for here in America, that's kind of old. For you all, that's not.
Yeah.
And so I think this sort of sorrowfulness, in this object, it seems to have a life, and it seems to be, I think there's something nice about this sort of slumped form. And then I was also looking at this next image, of our Capitol dome, and it just seemed poignant. It was totally under construction. There's scaffolding around it, and I thought, what an interesting image, right? To think about our government being under construction, metaphorically, right? And the idea of scaffolding as another nod to construction, or the act of making, I think became it's always been interesting to me. So this image, I was like, wow, this is really something beautiful in and of itself, or at least sad, or something about this image is important. And so you'll see in the next ones, these other images of scaffolding, right, as this really beautiful constructed thing that holds something up and or might collapse as well. And I like how it speaks to the act of making. That sort of act of pursuit of progress is something I think I play with or try to. So the next bit of imagery is from an exhibition called the Acts of Contrition, which was in New York at the Sculpture Space, NYC. And, this is referencing, oh my gosh, the titles are also from another author from the South that is sort of a tragic, dark Gothic, Southern Gothic. And so here I'm taking multiple objects and sort of thinking about how I can scaffold them together with this sort of wooden scaffolding that situates a number of pieces. And so if we click through these, the next one, oh, I guess there's just another image of this, but so you can see this from the other side, and how, they're meant to play off each other. So I'm also playing with those slumped forms and reintroducing them. So that red object there is this sort of collapsed and sort of slumped volume. And I think the way that it sits and activates the porcelain structure next to it, I like that sort of dialogue that goes between there. So we'll click through these, and this is just the exhibition. So if we have some parts of that same piece sort of broken out, and then you'll see some images that sort of are details. And the next one is a new grouping that has some, also some plastic fencing underneath it that plays off a plastic slumped glaze in the right. And there's chunks of concrete that exist within this work. And you'll see in the next details here. I want to respect the time here. So as we move through the next bits of this work, you'll see those details come together.
Yeah.
And then I made some pieces for the wall, or maybe they became pieces for the wall. And I liked how they sat in that, changing the gravitational axis of this work. And so this yellow form and this, the red form is going to come next. And then just for a little update, there's some other elements that, from recent exhibitions that talk about how this glaze sits and is used to hold up these works. And so Tilted Arc is sort of a historical nod there. And Totem, where I'm using the plinth, becomes this, the pedestal becomes this sort of structured to hold the collapsed object. And then to wrap things up, lately I've been playing with the idea of the vessel and really, exploring that as give myself some parameters within, some tighter parameters to explore and to take some risks. So thank you so much.
Thank you a lot for your presentation. What is interesting, and that we started with Kafka's Metamorphosis to pass through the wasteland, arriving to O'Connor, if I'm right.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
It's one of my fav. I really like it. And so there is this idea of as we were saying, of some elements typical of modernism, like the fear of progress or the doubt towards progress and science that were already there in modernism and in the first avant-garde of the 20th century. What I find very interesting is how you can elaborate, how you try and you, according to me, managed to elaborate these groundbreaking language typical of the avant-garde, but readapting it in a new contemporary way in which what is breaking is actually the work of art, but with always an aesthetic value of the form, as you were saying, that is something that couldn't exist in the avant-garde, for example, and the idea of beauty and destroying beauty. Instead, he knew the importance of the quality of the beauty of the glazes, the shape, the curves is still in there. And I think it's really challenging and really interesting. Another aspect that is quite important to me, at least, is what you mentioned, the importance of time and labor in your practice. And another aspect that we didn't mention, because you are so good at it, but I think it's important to mention, is that the technique. I mean, you work with porcelain. We know the problem that porcelain has in distortion while in the kiln. So how, if I may, is a very technical question, but how much you can plan and how much you leave to the casuality of the kiln in your process of working?
Hope it's spinning now, but hopefully that means you can still hear me.
Yeah,
it's pretty controlled at this point. You know, I think what happens is when I adjust it so that I'm causing the collapse, I can only it doesn't always collapse in a beautiful way. And I think that's what's important. So some fail because they collapse, and I don't think they.
We lost him partially. We have a problem of connection, but if there is still this problem of connection, we will. Peter, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, from time to time, if it goes down again, I will pass to Yves, and then we will come back at the end. But let's try it. No. We don't try it. So Peter, if you can hear me, okay, I will go on, and then if your connection is more stable, we will finish this particular aspect, because I think it's really interesting, especially also for the public interest in ceramics and the price in general. So after Peter, the other artist after him was Yves, who had problem of connection as well when we did the technical rehearsal. So if Yves is not here, which might be possible, we agreed that the director, Claudia Casali, will read a short statement that he wrote for this presentation.
Yes. So Yves sent us his journey, a mini lecture for this talk. And I'm reading what he wrote directly in the first person. I would like to start this talk in showing a few key works before I start with showing the work I made for the Faenza Prize. This is the work with the title Atomic Hoover, a kind of fairy tale vacuum cleaner on skis with what I won the first prize on Biennale in Aveiro in Portugal in 1993. A happy, colorful work. I got really nice souvenirs from these events. In 1993, I was starting the collaboration with the Contemporary Art Gallery in Antwerp, Belgium, but by that way, it was a decision to don't profilate me anymore in the work of ceramics. I stayed with the gallery till 2003, and I would like to show two works from that period. This one, the Cactus Boy, it's a work from 3 meters high, made in plastic and polyester. The stair is in metal, and the white floor are sugar cubes. The golden boy has a classic costume and his head is a cactus. The second work is a chapel I made for an open-air art event, Tempus Arti in Belgium. The curator was Janut, the man who also curated the Documenta in Kassel in 1992. Outside you see a basic chapel with Gothic windows. Inside you could adore the golden ham. The colors inside were either Asiatic, gold and red. After the ham, you could find the text Jamón es nuestra religión. That means ham or meat is our religion, something that refers to the carnal in life. In the year 2003, the gallery in Antwerp stopped her activities. At the same moment, my first child was born, and I don't know why, I was starting again working in ceramics. I was going down to the studio, I took a little clay, and that's it. And of course, I was looking out for galleries who wanted to expose to my works. I took my chance with international competitions. So I was very happy to collaborate with various ceramic events in Europe and also in the Far East. I had a really nice adventure, like in the Biennale in 2012 in Inge Museum in Taiwan, where you can see the work exhibited here. And one of the highlights was certainly the Biennale of Valoris in 2014, in the next image, where I got the luck to win the first prize in the section Sculptural and Conceptual Ceramics. This is one of the two works who are now in the collection of the Magnelli Museum over there. One of my important evolution is also the use of films and other imagery in my work. Sometimes with projecting images on a part of the work, sometimes the work becomes a part of the film. I'd like to show you some example, but I don't want to start explaining the conceptual poetry of each work, because time is not enough. Danza de los Enanos, Dance of the Midget, is a work with a black and white slide show on the midget before. The slides were images from serial killers and pedocriminals. The work was presented for the first time in the Westerwald Ceramic Museum in Germany in 2013, and this work was chosen by Judith Schwartz. Another interesting presentation was the work I Shoot Them All, with what I won the Ceramic Triennale in Holland in the year 2012. A last example is the installation Mariage Carousel that I presented on the Biennale in Valoris in 2019, where I was the jurors. And I met Yves. So when we still have a little moment, yes, we have, there is the work for the Faenza Prize, especially made for the Faenza Prize. Mea culpa, mia maxima culpa is the title, the Latin title of this project, which came out of the Catholic worship, where they use these words for the confession of guilt. My fault, through my most grievous fault. This is the title in English. In this work are used many religious elements coming out of the Catholic religion. I'd like to give an ambient of a kind of procession where Catholics take out their saints and the relics out of the church to make a walk to the city. The installation presents 10 sculptures, like the 10 Commandments from Yves Malfiet. I can start to explain every meaning of every sculpture, but I don't find it necessary. It's very nice and funny that every spectator can consume the work like he wants, depending on his social, geographic, cultural, or maybe religious context. So you can see the images passing through. And we arrive to this. Today is the opening of my new solo show in the 12 Vic Gallery, a brand new contemporary ceramic gallery in Antwerp, in Belgium. This is one of the work, Eclectic Hallucination, and there are some others that we can show.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Ciao. So thank you, Yves, for this presentation. I met him different times in a different international competition, and I may say that it is a pity not to have him here for this bad connection, because he could give us his irreverent, grotesque, and satiric talk. I think that he is able to point out the limit of the society, the credo of the lifetime, and religion, politics, as you can see, and also to point attention to the difficulties of the society from a social point of view. And yes, you can see this, especially in the installation that he is pointing out this. And it's a pity that we cannot see the installation for the Faenza Prize. But now he has a new sculptural project presented today in Belgium.
Yeah, exactly. So good luck to him. Due to this fact, in the gallery there wasn't such a good connection, of course, and so that was the main problem of the technical solution. But thank you so much, Claudia, for having read his words so that the public could have heard at least his explanation from his own words. So thank you a lot again. I think we can then move forward. So Rob, if you want, we can. Here we are. Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And if you want, you can start, and then maybe I will ask you some few questions.
Okay, well, thanks also for the opportunity to the MIC and the staff. So I will take you to some installation works with which I am searching for a combination of sound and ceramics. I got fascinated by sound by making ceramic sculptures. There's always a relation with sound. And with this installation, I for the first time, asked a composer to join me in this project. And I made shapes. We experimented with unfired and fired shapes. And we did a sound performance with 4 voices for this. And with this installation on steel poles, it's called Horror Vacui, so the fear of emptiness. And so it's kind of hollow pipe with a non-shape on top of it, and which created uptones. And with this installation, I won a bronze prize in 2011 in South Korea, in Incheon during the Biennale. The next slide, please. So this I have to introduce because that's going to be a short trailer. So this is the trailer of a documentary of 43 minutes, but this will only take 4 minutes. In 2013, I decided to recycle my sculpture works that I made until then. And then I gave them a new life because I grew more and more into multidisciplinary works and in installation works. So I changed my whole studio to a theater, and I asked several musicians to join me and actors, etc. So I set up a whole like a funeral auction to give the audience a last chance to bid on my work, or it would have been destroyed. So maybe we can start that now.
Yeah.
Het publiek gaat de plaats innemen van mijn beelden. Dus al die kisten gaan hier weg en dan kunnen hier straks aan twee kanten 2 rijen publiek zitten op 1 meter of 3 hoog. Dan moet ze hier ook het condoleanceboek tekenen. Gaat er een beeld vallen, dan voelen ze dat vallen ook door de trilling door het gebouw heen.
De natuur bestaat ook bij de gratie dat dingen verloren gaan en gerecycled worden of geherordend worden of geherinterpreteerd worden.
Je kunt wel zeggen, beelden zijn niet voor de eeuwigheid, maar het is toch ook gewoon doodzonde?
De 17 november is de veilingdag.
En dat gaat dan bij Opbod.
En daar gaat dan eigenlijk bij Opbod, ja.
Iemand meer dan 6,50.
Dus het publiek bepaalt mede het voortbestaan van het werk.
Het is geen rommelmarkt, hè? Dat dingen die op het allerlaatste blijven staan, dat je die zegt, nou neem maar voor €1 mee.
Kabel 18 is niet verkocht en kan ter aarde worden besteld.
Je hebt zelf iets gecreëerd, daar ben je jaren mee bezig geweest eigenlijk. En dat ga je dan eigenlijk zomaar weggooien. Ja, zo zie ik dat dan een beetje. En ik snap zijn gedachtegang ook wel hoor. Een periode afsluiten en weer verder. Maar ik geloof niet dat ik daarbij hoef te zijn.
Die moet straks losschieten en weer even terugveren. Dus ik wil niet dat die losschiet voordat ik dat wil.
Dit was maar een lichtbeeld. Ik heb ze tot 500.
Ja, nee, dat is wel. Als een beeld kapot valt, is het toch een ander soort afscheid dan wanneer het beeld met iemand meegaat. Daar zit ik steeds mee.
So we're back.
Yes.
Okay. I put 27 sculptures to auction, and it was a very intense 2.5-hour lasting performance, in which the audience also got internal conflicts because I didn't set a minimum price or something. That was not my goal. And so there were a lot of psychological things going on. There were 90 people joining. So yeah, so still, it still gets me, in a way. Okay, and the next slide is an installation of 18 anchors. Oh, can you go back one? Thank you. So this is these are 18 anchor-like shapes of ceramics, about 1.7 meters high, and they all started to swing gently with a computerized choreography, and they are about what makes us go forward, what makes us go making progress, and we are still on a swing, so we only are hanging on 2 wires fixed to something. So what keeps us on hold, or what makes us progress? So this is also very poetic, but in general, it's these are firm shapes which really come forward to you, and it's like walking in a sea of shapes. And yeah, it's about longing, moving forward, but you can't. Next, please. This is the work I want to send in for Faenza. So next, please. So this is 2.4 meters high. Okay, we're back. That was Mon Bonheur B. So it's my finest hour, I would say. I translated it like my finest hour.
Okay.
And it's part of an installation I'm working on right now. So you see here 2 sphinxes opposite. The left one is 2.60 meters. And the Mont Bonheur B is about a relation with the pump jack, so pumping the energy out of the earth, and maybe we get overwhelmed by our own progress of making new buildings, etc., and still want to continue forward. In the meantime, we wear out Mother Earth, so to say. But it also it cannot be reached, these glass buildings. They are, for me, very abstract. So all kinds of things that happen inside are, for me, more abstract than art in general. And in the back, you see a steel tower, and that's based on the Burj Khalifa, the highest building in the world, built in the middle of the desert. And if we go to the next slide, and this is an animation of the whole project I'm developing now. So I want to make a whole desert of clay and let it dry out. And on front you see all kind of carton-like refugees, carton boxes, which you cannot get in. They are about 1.20 meters high and 1.5 meters long.
Okay.
So you walk through them, but you cannot get in. It's like a refugee camp. And on the floor, there's a skin of mouse pads I printed in China when I did a residency there. So they're all city situations. And we as humans have the luxury to walk over this skin of the street level and then walk through this desert. So you get the sense of, you go through a gate you walk in a desert and you hear this, that you destroy earth because it's all dry clay, so it breaks under your feet. And then at the end, you see the steel tower as a kind of Fata Morgana. But is that what is that our solution, so to say? Is that what gives us content in life? So that's what I'm working on right now. It should have been realized, but also due to Corona, it's delayed to next year.
Of course.
So that's more or less what I'm working on.
Thank you a lot for this beautiful presentation, especially for the video that really gave us the size of the project, and also for this rendering that clearly illustrates how ambitious is your next installation. I mean, we are talking about some tons of clay, I think,
Yes, I usually order by the ton. Yes, that's true.
So it's really impressive as a amount and measurement. But besides that, what really excited me is also the title, the Fata Morgana effect. Reminds to my mind Werner Herzog, very famous movie, and this idea again that is a sort of connection running through the presentation of today, of this idea of progress as something that is dangerous and challenging. And I think last year we all lived, made us very clear our responsibilities towards the equilibrium between animals' progress and us as humankind. I mean, if we want to keep staying alive, we might think more about what is surrounding.
What I forgot to mention is that also, especially for this occasion, the international composer Kate Moore is writing a choir piece, because what I did not mention is the using sound, and I mean singing, is for me it's the same value as working with clay. It's also the base of life, you know, to use sound. And working with clay, it has for me a clear relationship, and so it's important for me to have an a cappella piece inside this desert. So she's almost finished with it, so there's going to be a special choir performance also in this work.
Fantastic. Thank you for this addition. I mean, I think it's very relevant, especially in this aspect that you were mentioning, the idea of going back to something really archaic at the base of humankind, both in terms of clay and sounds that maybe we hear even before being able to speak. I mean, sounds were with us. We were
exactly.
able to speak. So thank you a lot. Unluckily, time is our enemy today. So I have to pass the word to the next artist, but really thank you for your presentation, and especially videos. They were really helpful in understanding also the motion of the works. So thank you a lot. So Eileen, finally we are at you. Okay, maybe you can switch on the microphone because you are.
Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. So thank you for this opportunity to show my work and talk about it. So I'll make some general remarks that reflect my thought process while I show some images, and then I will refer more specifically to some of them and the piece selected for the Faenza Prize. For many years, my principal art making practice has been painting. I started studying ceramics 8 years ago at the local art academy, and I've been fortunate to have two very generous teachers. In the last few years, I've made sculptures that are based on the vanitas genre of art that became popular in the early Renaissance. Vanité, you may know, are still life paintings in which the objects have symbolic significance that relate to Old Testament notions of the vanity of earthly goods and pleasures. Next slide. I'm drawn to the sensuous depiction of the objects in the silent drama of light and shadow. Next slide. When I showed the first of these works, some people asked of each piece, what does it mean? As in my mind, I was essentially playing with form, I had no response, and found myself invoking Jack Kerouac, who said, "I have nothing to offer except my own confusion," in order to close down the conversation. But what I was really thinking was, why do you need to know? And I became quite obsessed with that question. Next slide. Why not a purely visceral experience of the work? Why this need for an explanation? What does it mean for something to have a meaning? And what does the meaning do for us? Next slide. So I found that the Vanitas theme, charged with meaning as it is, served as a useful vehicle for me to engage visually in what I call a seriously playful way with these questions. I like the idea taken from psychoanalysis that when you talk, things fall out of your pockets. And I think it's analogous when making art. So my approach is based on the premise that we don't really know what we're saying, and also that we often say more than we mean to say. Next slide. My process, therefore, is fairly intuitive. By this, I mean there's no clearly discernible end when I begin the work, and links between thoughts and forms converge as the sculptures themselves take shape. The next slide. But of course, what I've just said is not entirely true. It's not without logic, and there are intentional patterns at play, but there are also things that turn up in the making of it. So the form for me is an opportunity for something like content or meaning to emerge. Next slide. Likewise, with the titles that I randomly extract from books, I find that they too conjure up a whole arsenal of meanings. But the works are over the top and quite theatrical. In fact, more like it's like a parody that mocks the seriousness of this pursuit. So I see them in a certain way as both cynical and also aspiring. So it seems to me to be paradoxical to talk about specific content in my work after what I've just said, but I quite like paradoxes, so I will share some of my thoughts that are framed by narratives that interest me. Next slide. This is one of the first pieces I made in the series. In it, you can see a lemon and walnut, which are both symbolic objects borrowed from the Vanitas iconography, as well as a skull, which is, of course, the ultimate memento mori, but could also be what I see as a kind of flamboyant Gothic trope, the skull being a motif sometimes used in the fashion world. I've combined this with other, what you might call more trivial forms, namely the upturned plastic container that functions formally as a pedestal here, but also may be seen to take on the role of a symbol, likewise the builder's hard hat. Next slide. Sometimes I will stumble onto an interpretation that particularly amuses me. For example, after making this piece, I was looking around a second-hand shop, and I found a plate with this peculiar motif of what I took to be an old woman reading her book. And I made a mental link with my sculpture. So in my mind, it became a story about Cinderella's last chance, which is meant as a joke, but may well be tied up with my feelings about time passing and missed opportunities. And this is probably an example of me saying more than I intended. Next slide. Oh, that's the plate that I found. But I like to think that meaning in this way is open and contingent. Next slide. An obvious but perhaps not uninteresting interpretation is that the work is a commentary on consumer capitalism. Actually, Dutch 16th century still life painting seems to mark the start of capitalism, with the newfound pleasure and pride in the things we accumulate, in the new and exotic. So while my random combination of objects initially aimed to question the lofty quest for meaning in art, it seems interesting to me to ask what the Vanitas warning might mean for us today. it does somehow seem portentous in our current time of consumerist plenty. The title cornucopia refers to the horn of plenty from Greek mythology that would produce whatever one desires. But here this heap of disorganized objects seems closer to a pile of trash that may also be seen to echo our quick fix throwaway culture. Next slide. Looking through a psychoanalytic lens, the work perhaps connects with how in our contemporary world we experience wanting. By this I mean desire, often through our consumer fixations. We could link this to notions about appetite. For example, Lacan's thoughts on the nature of desire. He suggests that unlike need, which can be satisfied, desire is insatiable. It's constant in its pressure and it's eternal. And when we work with clay, there is also, of course, a very sensual engagement with the material. There is something addictive. The title, This Unmanageable Thing, for me becomes a reference to the primal desire that is essentially, according to Freud, our driving force. The next slide. A question I've asked myself is why I simply don't make sculptures using the original objects themselves. I think there's something counterintuitive, perhaps even perverse, about translating mass-produced, mundane, cheap throwaway objects of instrumental value into a nobler, fragile material in this age of the ready-made. I guess it's reactionary, a kind of nostalgia for permanence and intrinsic value. Next slide. As far as glaze goes, I approach this aspect of the work as a painter, and the bisque-fired sculpture becomes a blank form which I consider in an abstract manner. Graffiti is the inspiration for my glaze application. I like the impulsiveness of it, its anarchic aspect, as it speaks to me of protest and dissatisfaction with the status quo. It's both a creative and a destructive act. And it may also be paradoxical to apply a brash street motif to objects that have more intimate domestic associations. Next slide. My color choices follow the playful burlesque route I've taken. The glossiness of the glaze likewise echoes this. Incidentally, the word glossy is defined as first the obvious having a surface luster or brightness, but also attractive in an artificially opulent, sophisticated, smoothly captivating manner and suggesting wealth. So the bright, perhaps even glarish gaze works with the idea of the shiny and valuable, status and individualism. We are in fact reflected in them, like Narcissus in his pond. So the work for this, selected for the Faenza Prize, builds on this theme. I'm also attracted to romanticism, and as the work took shape, it became something of a nod to Grycko's Raft of Medusa that you see there. I'm interested in the melodrama of this kind of turbulent aesthetic. So next slide. So that's the piece chosen for the Faenza Prize. So in this sculpture, I more or less threw everything in there to see what results. And I titled the piece Riders on the Storm after the Doors song that I heard on the radio one day. The Raft of Medusa sprang to mind for obvious reasons, but then I found another interesting connection. The words of the song are Riders on the Storm, into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown. And I discovered that the line, into this world we're thrown, was a reference to Heidegger's notion of thrownness, which speaks of the arbitrary and random nature of existence, which is an idea that has enormous resonance for me and also for my work. Next slide. So when I presented this work for my graduation exhibition, I suspended it from the ceiling, as you see here. And the next slide, please. And then I've worked on this idea further in the work you see here, which I made for an exhibition that took place in Brussels last year. And in closing, I just would like to add that it came as something of a surprise to me to find myself cultivating this rather Baroque aesthetic. But this way of surprising myself has been something that really drives me when doing this work. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you a lot for this very precious presentation with so many references across centuries. Well, let's say that we started with Lynch, fire work with me, water work with me, and we ended up with the Doors. So it's a good journey. Today we are in very good company. But I have just one question, because for me it's really close to what I study, what I like, and particularly what is striking is how you defined the importance of desire as a sort of driving force, really, as Freud wrote and you mentioned, as something that really keep us moving, and it can be disruptive, but it has also the real power that we have, which is, it's something huge and really complicated. And today's in our contemporary society, as Lipovetsky, another great philosopher, French philosopher, wrote, rather than living the desire, we substituted the desire with the idea of pleasure or leisure. So the idea of satisfying immediately the desire, as if the desire is just the desire of having, rather than the desire and the anguish and the fear. I mean, it's much more complicated, but in nowadays society, we converted it with this idea of leisure, pleasure, and consumism. And so then the accumulation that you were quoting, the Baroque aesthetic, it comes with a new possible interpretation towards this idea of desire that you were describing. So for me, it's really important, and somehow also connects your work with the journey we did today in this idea of a contemporary reinterpretation of modernism, or the basis of modernism, like the critique of progress, but also the beginning of analysis with Freud and so on, and how can we interpret again these huge books and authors that we have. So really, thank you so much. I don't want to waste longer the time of our spectators. If there are direct questions with me just talking, but if there are some questions, we can take them. If not, I will pass again the word to Claudia.
Yes, we don't have many questions, but comments, good comments, of course, to your work, and thank you very much for your great presentation. You were fantastic. I had a little bit collapse with the video of Rob, because it was very strong, yes. And I cannot imagine how was your feeling destroying your works. So it was really a conceptual, big conceptual work. So, and Ranti Tiani is online, and he said to Eileen that being your own art analyst helps as well. That's very good. So I think, Irene, that today we passed from the poetry of the beauty of the natural elements to the structure, architecture, and collapse. And we pass through the attention of the guilt of societies and the big scale, impressive installation and its materiality. And we finish with the paradox of the vanitas of society. And it's a great, perfect cycle of, it seems to be done for purpose, but it wasn't. And I have to say that it was a very brilliant presentation, very brilliant conversation that makes a lot of points and a lot of thematic that are very, very actual. So thank you very much for your presence here, and And yes, as usual with Irene, we are passing the time. So we have to close our conversation, and I am inviting you to the last talk of March 18th with Matteo Lucca, Makiko Nagai, Julian Stair, and Anne-Marie Van Sprang. And then we will have the presentation of the book, not an exhibition catalog, but a real great book of all of your experiences, Saturday, March 27, of course, at 4 p.m. That is our time to connect all the world. So thank you very much for your presence. Thank you for the audience. Be online, and see you next week. Bye.